Hi, and welcome to the Restorative Wellness Clinicians Corner, video series exclusively for functional health professionals, where we interview the top experts in the latest research, products, tools, and best practices for getting your clients exceptional results. So welcome everybody to the Restorative Wellness Solutions Clinicians Corner. I'm super excited about our guest today. Dr. Aimie Apigian is with us today. Hi, Dr. Aimie.
Hello. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you.
So excited. We are going to dive into the topic of trauma, which I feel like it's one of these topics where I feel like we all talk about it a lot. We kind of throw that word around, sometimes lightly, sometimes not lightly, but I feel like it's really important for us to understand what it actually is. And in our work as practitioners, it comes up a lot. And so we're going to do a deep dive. I want to read your incredible bio, and then let's just dive right on in. So Dr. Aimie Apigian is the leading medical expert on how life experiences get stored in the body and restore the body to then its best state of health through her signature model and methodology, the biology of trauma. She is a double board certified medical physician in preventative medicine and addiction medicine. She has a master's in biochemistry and a master's in public health. In addition to her medical training, she's also a functional medicine physician and has training and certifications specifically in neuroautoimmunity, nutrition, and genetics for addictions, mental health, and mood and behavioral disorders. She has several certifications in various trauma therapies, including the instinctual trauma response model, which is an art trauma therapy, somatic experiencing, developed by Dr. Peter Levine, just a little side note, I love that, and neuroaffective touch, Dr. Aileen Lapierre. Dr. Aimie brings you the biology of trauma, which is a new lens and a methodology that courageously both adds to and bridges trauma work and medicine by reverse engineering the chronic effects of trauma on the nervous system and body on a cellular level. This is going to be great. I'm so excited to talk with you. Can you start us off by sharing a little bit about your personal journey, what attracted you to this field?
Oh, I was not attracted to this field at all. This was never supposed to happen. I never saw this becoming my career. Now, I'm extremely happy and I'm so glad that this now is my journey. But I actually adopted my son, Miguel, when I was in medical school. So I was in medical school at Loma Linda University, also had just finished my master's in biochemistry. And I decided that I wanted to become a foster parent. And he was the first child that they placed with me. And Margaret, I just knew that my love would be so strong for him that it would just kind of wash away and overpower all of the negative experiences that he had prior to coming to me.
Yeah.
And so I did everything wrong. And found out that love is not enough. Got to figure out, what does a person need? What does a nervous system need that's been through overwhelming life experiences that it's shut down? It won't open up to love, won't open up to trust, just won't open up anymore. It's done.
Right.
And then when I was in general surgery residency, and yes, I did say that correctly, I went on into general surgery residency, like that was my career path. Then I had a huge health crash myself and got diagnosed with chronic fatigue syndrome. And we didn't know all the reasons that were contributing to it at the time, of course, but I noticed that all of the symptoms, the health conditions that I was developing were related to adverse childhood experiences. And I was like, no. Like, that's not me. Like, if that were my son, I would totally understand.
Right.
But me, like, I didn't have trauma when I was a kid. And so I got to redefine like what trauma actually is and be able to understand why not only me, but many, many people had what we think was decent enough. Yeah, our families were quirky or weird or whatever, right? But we don't look back and see trauma, and yet how we can have those trauma patterns stored in our body. And so that became then my study. It was just to help myself, Margaret. Like, I had to get my life back. had figured out what kids need. So I had started actually by now a nonprofit to help other adoptive families. But now I got to figure out how to rewire, how to address stored trauma as an adult.
Right.
And it's quite different because you have all this compounded effects on the biology.
Right.
And so, it became my study to just help myself. But then I started realizing that I think everybody has this, because I now could not see it in all of my patients. And then I started seeing that there's overwhelm everywhere. There's trauma that's driving so much of our health and our life, and we need to be able to have tools. So I started sharing it with other people, and what I had needed to do for myself started helping a lot of other people. So here we are.
Here we are. And I mean, what a powerful personal journey. And yes, so many key messages in there that I just want to tease out and highlight. That love isn't enough, right? Like that is something I think that we can feel, that we can apply that to a child for sure, to ourselves as well. We can feel like, well, I do all the things, right? Like I meditate and I do this and I do that, all the things. And sometimes that's not enough. We have to unpack those layers that, as you also said, as we mature into adulthood, we sort of baked it in a little bit more, right?
Right. And that's the other big misconception is like, oh, time heals. No, time doesn't heal anything. Time just cements it further into our biology. So we've got to do the work, and then with time, we can heal. But just time by itself, love by itself, is not healing.
Yeah. Well, let's unpack the language around this, because I want to just go back. As I said, we throw around this term trauma. Oh, I was traumatized. Oh. And sometimes it's flippant. Sometimes the word trauma can inspire its own emotional reactions. So can you define for us what exactly it is? And then on the flip side of that, what it is not?
Yeah. And if it's okay with you, I'll throw it out to the group before I answer that question.
Absolutely.
And if you want to just type into the chat what you think is the difference between stress and trauma. And then I'll use that as a springboard for sharing about the biology, the physiology of what's happening in the nervous system. So Katie, stored negative energies. Okay, would that be stress or would that be trauma? I'm assuming you're talking about trauma, but I don't want to assume anything. Trauma is an experience you can't integrate into your life, Laura. It's a good definition for trauma. So the difference between stress, am I stressed, or is this a trauma for me?
Right.
The difference between stress and trauma. You guys are in finals right now. Are you stressed or are you traumatized? Is Margaret stressing you out or traumatizing you?
You can answer honestly.
Honestly. All right. I'm glad that we're thinking about this, because honestly, the people that are coming to you are going to be in one of those categories. People don't come to you because they're feeling well and they're in parasympathetic and all is great in their life, right? They're coming to you because they are either in stress mode or they're in trauma mode. And knowing the difference, being able to recognize the difference, gives you the specific tools that they need at that moment, which can totally change the dynamic, because not only do they develop more trust in you when you can meet them where they are at that moment, but then it allows them to make huge steps forward on their healing journey, when with other practitioners, they would stay stuck because other practitioners are using the wrong tools, not knowing if, hey, they're dealing with stress or trauma. So let's think of a scenario. Yeah. And I want you to think of, you're holding up different rocks. And I don't know how many rocks you can hold at one time, but let's imagine that you are holding up rocks. That is a stress. You're holding up rocks, right? And actually do this with me, like hold up some rocks. And if you want to just imagine one rock, one big boulder that you're holding up, right? How long can you hold that up? As long as you are holding that up, you are stressed because stress is a high energy. Now, the moment that that rock crushes you, that is the moment that trauma happens. So the stress is high energy. I'm holding it up. I'm managing. It may not be pretty, but I'm managing. It's high energy. And the moment that you can't hold it up anymore and the rock comes down on you, we feel the collapse of an internal energy. Our system gets overwhelmed by that. There's two reasons why it gets overwhelmed. I can share that. But that overwhelm is now the trauma response. It's a completely different physiological state than the stress response. So with stress response, guess what? Your adrenaline is pumping, your metabolism is going at high speed, your mitochondria are being stretched to the max because you are really performing at your physical best. That's stress. And trauma is the moment that that stress response can no longer maintain itself. And so your body literally switches into a low metabolic state. It's not going to use up energy now. Now it's going to conserve energy above all else, which means that anything that takes up energy from you, you're going to get very frustrated at, you're going to get irritated at, you're going to snap at them. You're going to feel that overwhelm. You're going to feel that panic and fear of, oh my goodness, I'm not going to be able to survive. I'm not going to be able to survive. And so with that overwhelm, with that trauma response now, the body literally has gone into a different physiological state. And to come out of that, it needs certain things.
Before we get that, this is brilliant. This is so great. I want to, seeing that pattern, that's a beautiful visual of holding the rocks where you're like hanging in there and making it work, and then they crush you. And I think I would be amazed if anybody on this call has not experienced that feeling of like, and now I'm going down, right? Like it's just when it just takes over and it becomes too much. And I think about that word overwhelm that also gets thrown out. And that's one of my things I'm working on is I don't do overwhelm. And so I think about the language. I see that Essie has a comment here. She says, stress is self-induced and trauma is others inflicted directly or indirectly. Is that the case, or can it be, is it always external, or can it actually be internally triggered?
Yeah, great question. And this is what I had to learn. This is not stuff that they taught me in medical school. So here I am in my bed, can't get out of bed with chronic fatigue, and I'm trying to figure things out by myself. And I start by mapping out my energy states because I can feel the shift in my energy. I don't understand it, but I can feel the different energy shifts in my body. And along the process, what I've learned is that, wait a second, I've always looked for external events as, oh, that was the trauma. And that's not the trauma. So the triggers for the trauma response are two things. One is something happens too much, too fast, or too little for too long. So let's imagine that we're back to holding those rocks. Well, what if you have a lot of gut inflammation? How long are you going to be able to hold those rocks up? Not as long as someone without the gut inflammation. Right? What if you're holding those rocks up and you have a methylation imbalance, or your detoxification genes aren't working as well, and you have already a high oxidative stress load? Your cells are what trigger the trauma response. It's actually not your brain. It's your cells. It's your autonomic nervous system in your body. They are the ones that decide, I don't think that we have enough energy to keep at this pace or to maintain this response to this threat or danger in our life. But what if your mitochondria are already compromised with the long list of things that can compromise our mitochondria.
Right.
Your cells are going to trigger that trauma response earlier because they sense that there's not very much energy. We better shut down in order to survive.
Wow.
So even with nutrient deficiencies, right? Like we can look at, oh, too little for too long. Well, yeah, we can think of it in terms of love and nurture and touch, too little of those things for too long. But what about a deficiency in an essential nutrient? What about a deficiency in magnesium? Like most of the country has a deficiency in magnesium. How long can you go with too little of magnesium? Eventually, it's going to be too little for too long. So the trauma response is the trauma response. And somehow we've categorized it as, oh, but that's only emotional, that's only psychological. And it's not true. Anything, internal, external, anything that influences the autonomic nervous system can trigger that trauma response. And everything in our biology is going to influence that moment, that threshold for, can I tolerate this as stress? Or am I going to go into the trauma response? The trauma response is there to save us. And many times, especially based on many people's health conditions, it's their own health condition that is triggering the trauma response.
So interesting. So, one of my, I'm sort of reframing some of the questions that I wanted to ask you here, because I think of, we think about trauma as being this blocking factor, right?
Sure.
And to the healing process. And you're right. Like we can think about a physiological trauma. When I think physiological trauma or physical trauma, I'm thinking like traumatic brain injury. I'm thinking of a ski accident, car crash. I'm thinking of like something like cancer, something very acute, very severe, very sudden.
Yeah.
But it makes perfect sense that I love the analogy of too little for too long, like a nutrient deficiency or just, the chronic depletion, the chronic drains on our system from so many different stressors, be it environmental pollutants, the air we breathe, the, poor water we're drinking. The list, we all know the list, right? So fascinating to think of that. So it becomes this, it is an aspect of things, but it's not just this, like we think about the ACEs, as you said, like we think of those adverse childhood experiences, and we think of it very much as emotional, and recognizing that these pieces, like they're so packed together is what I'm understanding from you, that you really need to be considering this profoundly, no matter what, really. One of my questions for you was like, are we all walking around in trauma? And I think the answer is actually yes. Can we not be, well, given this definition? This is something that every single one of us, and we're a group of practitioners here where we've got lots of tools, we can do the things on ourselves. But I think bringing that awareness, that piece, that is really profound. That is not this physiological, it's not a brain process, it's a cellular process.
Not at all. And that's why so much of my message is that trauma is biology. It's not our psychology. And by just putting it into that category and then deciding that we need to send people to therapy to talk about it has been one of the biggest misfortunes that we've done for people. That's not only not helped them, but re-traumatized many of them, because they're just rehashing a story that puts them back into a trauma response every time they tell the story. Whereas when we understand the overwhelm in that trauma response, and we can come in and we can say, all right, trauma response, I know what you need. And the trauma response needs specific things. It needs a felt sense of safety. The stress response needs something else. And since you guys are going through your finals, I'll tell you what the stress response needs. But the trauma response needs a felt sense of safety. It's like if you were a turtle and you had pulled your head inside your shell because there was danger outside, you're not going to stick your head out until the danger is gone. Like, you're not stupid. Our bodies are not stupid. Our bodies went into the trauma response to protect ourselves. It actually protects our homeostasis. So it protects our heart. It protects our blood pressure. It protects our sodium levels in our blood. Like, it protects all of these physiological mechanisms that we just think, oh, it's emotional. No, it's actually your physiology that it's protecting when it shuts down. And so that trauma response needs a felt sense of safety. And then it needs energy Because if it had more energy, it actually would never have gone into the trauma response. It would have stayed as a stress response. And then it needs time. So time, safety, and energy. Those are the things that the trauma response needs. Now, what's awesome is that when you can recognize that the person sitting in front of you has just been overwhelmed by all the things that you've just told them that they need to do and fix in their life. And they're looking at you and you can tell that, oh my goodness, I just put this person to overwhelm. This is their trauma response. Guess what? Like, we can step in and we can provide a felt sense of safety.
Right.
And we can break things down easier for them, make things more bite-sized, make things manageable so that they're not getting overwhelmed by all the things that we're telling them that they need to do. So that's what the trauma response needs. And for those, even of those of you who recognize, maybe I'm living with the trauma response at times where I'm noticing that I go into that overwhelm or that collapse of energy, and I just want to pull the covers over my head and not even get out of bed because I'm already overwhelmed by my day when I first wake up. Then being able to know that I have tools, and these are the tools that I need to bring in. I need to focus on creating a felt sense of safety for my body above all else. That's where you would start. And then being able to bring energy into the system. And so this is where I am very different than some of my wonderful medical or functional medicine practitioners who want to focus in on the adrenal glands for chronic stress. And I'm saying, no. The adrenal glands are not the problem. It's the trauma response that's shutting down the adrenal glands. And so we need to come in, we actually need to help this person come out of the trauma response. And we do that by bringing energy into the system. Then once we've got them up into the stress response, now we can focus on the adrenals and supporting the adrenals. So it's a very different framework when you just see the body through the lens of stress or trauma.
When
so
you say,
yeah.
Oh, I apologize for interrupting. When you say bringing energy into the system,
Yeah.
you talk a little bit more about what you mean by that?
Yes. So I'm going to be focusing on what is draining the energy and what are the compromises to the mitochondria. So that literally I'm helping the body have more energy.
Okay.
Because otherwise it won't come out of the trauma response.
Right.
That's its way of surviving life.
Right.
There's no way that I can convince it to survive life in a different way until I give it the energy that it needs to be able to do something different.
I love it. I love it. I want to not leave our stress people hanging.
I know, right? Like, so let me say that there's one big misunderstanding of the difference between stress and trauma, and how many people think that they're stressed when they're actually living from a trauma place. And that is people who experience anxiety and that hamster wheel thinking and energy throughout their day. But in order to do that, they had to create adrenaline for themselves. Mm-hmm. And we see this through procrastination. We see this through multitasking. We see this through stimulants like caffeine, where I'm feeling low energy. I don't like feeling low energy. So I'm going to somehow make myself feel more energy by stressing myself out. And so we see people that like stay in bed until they have to jump out of bed, fly through their morning just to be able to make their meeting on time or get the kids out of the house to school or whatever it is. And they've waited until the adrenaline hits them. Mm-hmm. Or they set deadlines and then they procrastinate until that deadline is so pressing that now their adrenaline helps them get it done. Those people who wait to study for their finals until never mind. We probably shouldn't talk about studying for finals. So that is a common way in which people can look and be like, but no, I'm stressed. Right. And I'm telling you, but that stress is just covering up the trauma response, because you actually had to stress yourself out in order to pull your body out of the trauma response to get anything done today. And at the end of the day, guess what? You're feeling exhausted. Yeah. the collapse, the burnout, and you're looking for ways to numb, whether it's overeating, that extra glass of wine, numbing out with social media, movies, whatever it is. That's how we can recognize that, oh, what I have thought is stress is actually a trauma response in my daily life. And let me work on that so that I'm not running on empty, but I'm actually running with a full tank of gas.
So would the differentiator be, and I'm thinking about this both for us. I mean, I think everyone here is probably having some pretty significant introspection right now. I know I am, thinking about, oh, is that stress? Is that trauma? So can you give us a little bit more insight into some clues? What I'm already hearing is like, if your sort of natural set point, I feel like that waking up in the morning is a pretty good litmus test. Like when you first wake up, are you like ready to go, feeling excited? Maybe you're anxious about something or you're nervous about something, but it's just like sort of you're compelled, right? As opposed to the like, oh, gotta climb to the coffee maker, get it going. Or, I've never thought of the sort of procrastination, but are you doing something to kind of jack yourself up and get through and then sort of collapse exhausted? And again, there's like a happy exhausted. There's like oh my gosh, what a great day. Wow, that was intense. Woohoo, and then there's the just really sort of collapsing. In addition to those kinds of cues, what are some things we can be listening for both in ourselves and in our clients?
Yeah. There are specific thoughts and language that go with the two different states. So if someone is in stress state, the thoughts and the words that they will be having oh my goodness, what's going on? What do I need to do? Tell me what to do. It's a very high energy state, and it's very much looking for solutions.
Mm-hmm.
When you are stressed, you want to take action.
Okay.
In fact, you need to take action. Like you can't not take action. It's like asking someone to stand there and just, have a lion run straight towards them without them running away. No, like you can't not run from a lion who's charging you. You're going to run. You are going to take action. That is the stress response, which actually is helpful because then it actually helps us discharge all the adrenaline that gets released. And that adrenaline, when we go into the trauma response, we don't discharge that because we don't take action. And that undischarged adrenaline is what causes a lot of problems, including the symptoms of fibromyalgia, chronic pain, body aches, those kinds of things that are associated with the trauma response. Now, the language of the trauma response, and this is really helpful to be able to identify if I am in the trauma response or if my patient or client is in the trauma response. Words like, and I'll never forget, the gentleman who came in and just sat down in my office, and I'm like, hey, how's it going? And he's like, oh, it's just too much. Bingo. I know where he's at right now. He's in the trauma response right now. That's the language of the trauma response. It's just too much right now. Life is too much right now. My marriage, my kids, my job, whatever it is, my health, like it just feels like it's too much. And even as I say that, you can feel the heaviness associated with that. There is none of this, oh, I need to take action. No, there's like, I'm too tired to take any action. Right. So that's the language that we want to look for. And just in our normal conversations now, you're going to start hearing people saying words that are in the stress response or words that are in the trauma response. And it's fascinating to hear how this has just come into our everyday language of, oh, this is just too much. Ooh, really? Okay, good to know. Good to know, because now I know where your system's at and where to meet you. And I'm not going to be coming in with all the advice on all the things that you should do because you're not taking action. You don't have the energy to take action. Your body's in the trauma response. You need a felt sense of safety.
This is fascinating. Cindy has a great question here about differentiating between the low dopamine ADD person who needs to procrastinate to stimulate catecholamines and the trauma low energy person who needs to procrastinate to generate energy and adrenaline.
Yeah. So Cindy, this is where we cannot separate our neurotransmitters from our nervous system. And so even for someone, say, who has low cortisol versus high cortisol, anyone who has low cortisol they're in the trauma response.
Yeah.
So same thing with dopamine. Anyone who has low dopamine, anyone who has low serotonin, just because they have those, and those may have come first, that will actually be one of those biology factors that predisposes them to experiencing almost everything as a trauma. Because everything feels too hard. Everything feels like too much. And so there are so many things that actually generate and cause a trauma response in us that has nothing to do with anything emotional or psychological. Now, what happens is that we tend to associate our emotions with that. And so when we're feeling overwhelmed, we just naturally tend to look outside of us for what's causing us problems. And it's easy for us to blame, like, oh, they are clearly stressing me out and they are clearly the problem. I need to go let them have it and let them know what I really think about them. It's really easy for us to externalize our internal experiences and take it out on the people and places around us. Whereas if we understood that, oh, like I am experiencing a trauma response and I may not even know what caused that. So first of all, let me work on getting out of it so that I can have a clearer mind and I'll better know how to manage the situation and know what really is causing this trauma response in my life. But there's, speaking of methylation imbalances, there's you are born with methylation imbalances, right? These are part of epigenetics. We have a lot more information now on what causes in utero epigenetic changes, like being born with an undermethylated status. And if you are born with an undermethylation status, not all of them, but many of them naturally will have lower serotonin and dopamine activity. Well, if you're a baby, and you're supposed to do all this attachment and bonding in your first 3 years of life as part of your healthy nervous system development and come out of childhood with a secure attachment, meaning that you feel secure in life and with other people. You need dopamine. Dopamine and oxytocin are your two neurotransmitters or hormones that are very central to that process. If you have low dopamine activity, you are set up to experiencing overwhelm and come out of childhood with an insecure attachment style, regardless of how good or bad your mother was. Your system was not available for that bonding process because of your biology. Right. So there's many things that we can look at, and we've tended to want to compartmentalize them into emotional versus medical. And when we look at the nervous system and we see that there's only one survival system, there's only one nervous system, then we see how it doesn't matter where the danger is coming from, whether it's internal and it's our own biology, or it's external and it's influencing our biology. At the end of the day, it's either stressing us out or overwhelming our capacity to manage it and reinforcing a trauma response, which is protective because it disconnects us from the very, very uncomfortable sensations that we can experience. It's very uncomfortable to experience loneliness. It's very uncomfortable to experience that sensation of, I am all alone. No one understands me. No one is here to help me. And I don't know what to do. I feel lost. I feel broken. I feel confused. Those are sensations that happen in our body that are extremely uncomfortable. And part of what the trauma response does that protects us is that it brings down the intensity of those sensations so that we are disconnected to a degree from our body. And that's why sometimes you'll even see coping mechanisms that help us disconnect from our body, like the overeating, like the over-exercising, overworking. Those are all things that help take us out of these very uncomfortable sensations in our body to help protect us at that time.
So as practitioners, thinking about this as a protective mechanism, we will always, I think, proceed with caution in in our care with clients anyhow, but this really underlies, when you talk about that sense of safety, right? That sense of safety. How can we in clinical conversations, many of us doing it via Zoom, not even in the same physical space, how can we help to create that in the brief amounts of time that we have with our client?
Yeah. Really important to have a conversation around this, because I guarantee you that many people are experiencing this. They're coming to you already overwhelmed. They're already feeling lost. They're already feeling overwhelmed with their health symptoms and where their life and health is at. And so being able to recognize that this is where they're at and what to do. So with safety, there are some very basic exercises that you can lead them through without even telling them that they're exercises that you're leading them through. And these are exercises that I teach in a program that I run that's called the 21-day journey, because they're so easy, but yet they're so profound in the sense of safety that it provides any nervous system. So one of them is going to be orienting. And so what I do is when I have someone come in, whether it's on Zoom or in person, everything is on Zoom these days, I'm actually taking the time before we get started to orient them to what we're going to be doing today. So I have them actually start with their surroundings and their environment. And I just have them look at their desk or wherever they're seated and say, hey, is there anything on your desk that just feels like it's bothering you that you just want to push away for the time being so that you can just be here with me? And so they orient to their immediate space outside of them. And then I have them orient to the computer and to me. And so that is just like, hey, I'm connecting with you. And is there anything that you would like different? This is the time to make any adjustments to your computer height, to whatever it is that you may want. Go grab a glass of water, whatever it is. And then I orient them to what we're going to do. So we're going to spend 35 minutes today. And what we're going to do is we're going to review your lab results. And then I'm going to explain the significance of those lab results. I'm going to explain to you then what we should do to address the lab results and what we find there. And then at the end, I'm going to leave 5 minutes for any questions that you have. Like, I orient them to the whole process of what we're going to do. There's nothing more unsafe for a nervous system that's already in overwhelm to not know what's going to happen.
Right.
So explaining it all out, just saying exactly what's going to happen, how much time we have, what we're going to do, and then what's going to happen next. Just those simple things, orienting to their environment and then orienting to what we're going to do here together today. And for that, like, their nervous system just settles because, okay, this just became manageable. I know what's going to happen. I know how much time we're going to be here. I can wrap my head around this, and this is manageable for me. It's the unknown that for a system that is dealing with so much other unknowns in life, it's just one more unknown. It's just one more reason to overwhelm their system.
Those are fantastic tools. And I can actually think of people that there's a coach that I work with who I'm now like, oh, that's what she's doing. Every time we first connect, she sort of grounds me to my space. And, so that's really interesting. I love that. Is there a difference? So you can see there's some questions here in the chat. Is there a difference in terms of how, I'm really understanding that, we always sort of say that stress is stress, and I'm hearing trauma is trauma. Like it's a physiological response. So in some ways, it doesn't matter what the trigger is. And yet we do sometimes bump into these situations with clients where we uncover a deep emotional wound that hasn't been healed. And so what are some strategies, and when do we know it's the time for us to, because they do need more work, we can support them physiologically. And I know I'm feeling fantastic that we have more tools than I actually even realized we did, because the work that we're doing is helping their physiology to settle.
Yeah.
and to give it that nourishment and that energy that it needs to heal. This makes so much sense. And I feel like this is explaining in many ways part of the reason why this functional model is so profound and often generates healing way beyond, the basic gut complaints or whatever it is that the client comes to you with. So these can be really life-changing moments. And now it's making sense as to why. And yet we come against these big issues, childhood abuse, or, just these big, deep wounds. What are some strategies? And then if we need outside help, knowing that some types of therapy can actually really re-traumatize. So we want to be cautious and conscientious there. So what do we do in those moments?
Oh, great question. So this is how I look at it. Imagine that there's a huge, deep swimming pool. I mean, we're talking like Olympic diving size pool. Would that pool, do you think, be big enough to hold the trauma that your client has been through? Or maybe we need an even bigger pool. Maybe we need the whole ocean, right? For some people, it feels like we need the whole ocean. That's how deep their stuff goes.
Yeah.
And when they are just starting out, or when they haven't done much what we call regulation, meaning actually learning how to settle their nervous system, be in the present moment and not be disconnected from themselves, they're still like a toddler.
Right.
They're like a toddler. Are you going to let a toddler go into this big diving pool and sink or swim? No, like there's no way you would ever, as a practitioner, find that safe for them to navigate. So even though their pool may be very, very deep, we only work on the surface level. And we build their skills, and really we're helping them learn how to build their own skills to then navigate deeper and deeper and deeper, but not until they're ready, not until they have learned how to swim, not until they've learned how to hold their breath, not until they've learned how to do these things. And yet many will come in not knowing that they need to build these skills first. They may dump on you, right? Anybody here ever felt like, oh my goodness, like I thought I was a health practitioner. I just feel like I'm a therapist. At least that's what they seem to expect of me. So what we look at is that we have to learn to help them be in the present moment, even though they may want to go into the deep end of the pool.
Right.
And so I always bring them back to and right now, what's going on in your body right now? Oh, but this happened to me back. I know that happened to you back then. I know. And right here, we're right here together. What are you noticing in your body right now? I'm noticing that your breathing is fast. I'm noticing that you can't stop moving your leg. I'm noticing these things about you. Do you notice those things about you? And then what we get to do is we get to put our attention on those present moment experiences in their body and get them out of the story. The story is not going to help them. You can see that they're having a trauma reaction in front of you by telling the story. Telling the story is not helpful to them. They just don't know that yet. Yeah. And so it's so important to just keep things at a surface level. Like, what are those things that they do have the capacity to deal with, that they do have the capacity to process in the moment? They have the capacity to process. Yeah. Like, I'm feeling stressed right now. My thoughts are going a million miles. Okay. Well, let's pay attention to that and see what we can do to just slow that down. How about we do some orienting? How about we do some grounding? And we stay out of the story and teach them, model for them how to stay in the present moment and be connected with themselves. When they go into the story, they actually disconnect from their body. They're all in their mind. And that's not where the healing happens. And that's why for us, like, right, you're not in a place where you're going to heal their trauma. That's not you. I mean, you're working on the physiology level. That's a super important level. And that is also why, as Margaret was saying, like what happens is that as you improve their physiology, they actually have more capacity to process trauma because their ability to stay present, their body sensations are different now that you've helped them with their physiology, now that you've brought down that inflammation, now that you've brought some energy into their mitochondria, now that you've worked on these issues, they have more capacity to process trauma. Their body's in a different place. And that's why stuff can come up. And we just need to pace it and match it to where they're at in their ability to process stuff.
That's really helpful. I'm realizing as you're speaking that, sometimes when we're working with clients, particularly when we're manipulating their diet, and as you said, overeating, or even not even for some people, overeating, but certain foods really numb them out.
Yes.
And so if we're manipulating the diet and we run into a food that they are really resistant to let go of, that might be a cue that it will actually tell us what to do in those moments. Because I think of these addictions as, and I'm trying to remember where I first learned this concept. I think it was Dr. Gabor Mate, but the idea that they're the medicine, right? Like someone who's an alcoholic, the alcohol is not the problem, it's the medicine, right? It's the trauma that's the problem.
Yes.
And so if somebody was really resistant to giving up a certain food or making a certain lifestyle change, I feel like it's really our responsibility as practitioners not to just rip it away from them and leave them without that Band-Aid, right? Can you give us some strategy to that? And then I want to make sure I give, I see folks have got some great questions here. I want to give them an opportunity too.
And this goes for so many different things, Margaret. There are so many things that we use as coping mechanisms for our emotions that we don't even realize.
Totally.
And what happens is that, what we can see is, oh, my weight is the problem, so let me go on a diet. And we don't realize that, well, no, the diet that you've chosen, how you eat is actually a solution to a problem. And so even if we were successful with a diet, if it was being driven by underlying trauma, it will show up in other ways in our health. It will show up now as an autoimmune condition. It will show up now as chronic disease. It will show up as fibromyalgia, as chronic pain, all of these things are health symptoms that are expressions of the trauma response. And so even if we are successful in one area, if we don't deal with the underlying trauma that drove that in the first place, it will pop up somewhere else in their life.
Yeah.
And so when I see someone who, even if we've identified that, okay, this is a Band-Aid, right? Like this is a coping mechanism, I approach it very differently. And this is where, for me, it's a combination of somatic work and what I call parts work or internal family systems, and working with these different parts of us that choose to do this in order to help manage emotions. So there's a part of us that can overeat. There's a part of us that can go shop. There's a part of us that can go do this. These are all different parts of us that are protective parts that try to help us. And we actually are not going to be successful at changing those until they are ready, until we have other tools that we actually don't need their help in that way anymore. And that is the hardest thing as practitioners, because from our standpoint, we can see so clearly that their diet is causing all these downstream effects. And we want so bad for them to change their diet. And even if we are successful, if it's being driven by stored trauma, that stored trauma will show up in another area of their life. It will. It's a guarantee. And so being able to step back and say, okay, we've identified that you have some stored trauma and that this is how you manage. So rather than rip off the Band-Aid, let's go get you some other tools so that you don't need this tool anymore. You have other tools. And that's why, for me, I personally don't send people to therapy, because the therapy that I see happening is re-traumatizing a lot of people by getting them into their story, into their head, and out of their body. And the solution is reconnecting them to their body and their felt body sensation, and then creating different felt experiences for themselves. creating a felt sense of safety. And then what the stress response needs is a felt sense of support, by the way. So that's where I send them, right? And so that's why I started leading my people through 21 days of what I call regulation tools, different exercises that help them connect with their body before I even started to do any lab work, any blood work, any medical work. Because I noticed that if I did that first, it created a whole new baseline for their health symptoms. Their sugars would be lower. Their thyroid levels would be different. Like everything would change once we just started some very basic, what I considered elementary work. We weren't even diving into the deep traumas yet at all. We're just doing basic work to connect them with their body so that they're not afraid of their body and they're not needing these coping mechanisms as much to deal with their stress. And it was amazing to me how much that was changing their health, even their blood work. So that's why I started leading everybody through that, asking them to do that. And so now that's what I do, right? Like I just lead groups of people through this 21-day journey so that they can experience it for themselves. And it's still amazing to me, the transformations that happen just over 21 days of basic somatic and parts work.
That's wonderful. And we're going to talk about how folks here can get access to that at the end, right?
Oh, awesome. Yeah. Would absolutely love to.
Let's do that. Karen, you've been very patiently waiting with your hand up. How about you ask your question?
Hi, thank you. I have many questions, but I'll only ask one, and it's basically that stems from the fact that besides, the childhood development trauma and all that, which I think many of us have, if not all of us. So we had my daughter was the victim of a violent crime in September 2019. And she's done a lot of work, but she ended up with severe suicidal PTSD. So this is a very serious thing. And then she's healed to a certain extent, but I know there's still a lot underlying it. And she did so much work, and she was in like a kind of a trauma recovery center, and just many things. Worked for like at least a year and a half, maybe 2 years on it. And then after a while, she hit like, okay, I'm done. I don't want to do this anymore. I want to live a normal life. I don't want to do this therapy, that therapy. I don't want to take vitamins. I don't want to regulate my diet. I don't want to do anything. She's just completely done with everything. She doesn't want to, and I know it's still locked inside of her, and I can see it in her stress response. She's reactive. And, I found a really great functional psychiatrist to help her, who also works with nutrition. Yeah, his number one recommendation was somatic experiencing. Second recommendation was EMDR. And so I found a really great EMDR person. She's an hour away. My daughter won't go. I don't know what's going on with that. And I'm not sure how much of EMDR it gets into the story. I've been told it doesn't, but how can you not get into the story with the eye movement? So I'm wondering if you recommend EMDR, or if there was something else that you'd recommend for a case like my daughter's.
That's a lot, Karen.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, that's a lot. So I'm gonna use your question as also an opportunity to just do a little more teaching, if that's okay, Karen.
Sure. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. When someone develops symptoms of PTSD later in life, it is true that, like you say, Karen, we all have some developmental early childhood stuff somewhere, somehow. And that is true for those who develop PTSD symptoms, even when that event, the trigger for those PTSD symptoms, did not happen until much later in life. They all have a significant pattern of overwhelm that got wired in early childhood. So one of the things that would be really important for her to look at is also just the early experiences of overwhelm. And again, for this stuff, you don't need to go into story. You don't need to even remember stories. You don't need events. You just need to work on what's coming up in the moment on the surface level. And for most everybody, that's always some form of overwhelm, stress, reactivity, right? And we work with that. And that's the beauty of somatic work, is that you just work with what's coming up right now today. The other thing that would be really important to know, and I'm sure that the functional psychiatrist talked to you about this, is that kind of that onset of PTSD is very closely related to the levels of oxidative stress inside the cells, and especially inside the nucleus, which then triggers epigenetic changes, making it harder to just bounce back to normal. So having her on some nutritional protocols that specifically addresses the oxidative stress will be very important to her for the rest of her life. For the rest of her life. So part of what we want to look at then moving forward is how can we help her biology so that she has the best chances at returning to a healthy state, healthier than what she's ever been before, not just before the event, but healthier than she's ever been before. And we want to look at the different biology factors that what we were talking about before can actually predispose someone to experiencing trauma. Did she already have low serotonin levels? Did she already have lower dopamine levels going into the event that it imprinted even more, and she's had an even harder time resolving that event than perhaps other people? I definitely strongly encourage everyone to do somatic work, whether or not you have had trauma or not. Like I consider somatic work, now that I know what it is and I've developed my own personal practice, this has just become my daily life. Like, it's not like I, have, oh, this is my somatic therapy time. Like, it's just become a part of my everyday life. And it's been amazing, the changes in my health and all areas of my health, emotional health, mental health, physical health, as a result of just, this is how I treat my body now. This is the new relationship that I have with my body as a result. In terms of EMDR, how I see EMDR is one of the modalities that helps to process trauma. And there's a difference between processing trauma and building our capacity for being present and connected, or what we call regulation. And those are two arms to healing trauma. Regulation, basically maintaining, keeping things manageable, and processing trauma. And many people try to process trauma without having that capacity to be present and connected with themselves. And that's where they get lost. And that's where they can get in deep waters without a life jacket.
Yeah, I think that's what my daughter has.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Have you heard, I don't want to put it out there, of something called honest sharing? It's this new thing from Germany, and people I know who are in trauma response say it really calms the nervous system. It gets you in touch with your body. I just didn't know if you heard anything about it, but
so any of it, I would think that any of those types of things could be helpful, Karen, right? Like, I don't care the name of it. It's more what's their approach and how are they doing it. If they're having people talk and get into story, no, like,
it doesn't do that.
Especially in group work, right? Especially in group work, that's going to trigger everybody else. Yeah. So you have to understand the principles, and maybe for you, it might be really helpful for you to go through the 21-day journey with me so that you understand the principles. Then you would be able to better see, no, that modality is not following the principles of the body. This one over here, even though it's by a different name, it's following the principles of how we work with stress and trauma.
Okay. I think I will take you up on that. Thank you.
This is a beautiful segue into telling us about how folks can get access to this 21-day journey, both for themselves and for their clients. And if there's details that we need to work out that I can send in replays, we can do that as well. I see there's a question. Is this recorded? You bet this is recorded. I know. I'm thinking I need to go watch the recording too. I can't take notes fast enough. So I think you're going to have lots of people here interested in doing the 21-day program. It just feels like that's the natural next step for everyone here and for their clients.
I think so. And I'm going to just move to the light so you guys can actually see me. So I would absolutely be honored to lead some of you through the 21-day journey. And what I also have is a weekend trauma healing retreat. So that could be another option too. I'm running that in January. The next 21-day journey is March 1st. So those are the next places to start. If you're looking at this and being like, hey, I want to learn more of this stuff and how to see it in my clients or even for myself. And so in January, and I can give you all these links, Margaret, in January, we have the starting place retreat. It's a Friday, goes Friday evening for 30 minutes, Saturday morning for an hour and a half, Sunday for 1 hour. And it really is just that, like just a starting place. I do somatic work and parts work so that you can start to get familiar with what those are. And it's a low enough commitment because again, like I'm all about keeping people out of overwhelm. So it's bite-sized pieces. And even the 21-day journey is bite-sized pieces. We do one exercise a day. It's actually 10 minutes a day that you really need to commit to learning one new exercise every day. We do meet as a group to do the exercise as a group. But all of this is very much like we just take action. We're just going to get to action. We're not going to talk about it, analyze it. We're just going to do it. And that's so different for many people in their experiences with working around trauma that it's very relieving. And it's amazing to them, the transformations that happen without ever going into story, because that's not where the healing is at. Mm-hmm.
This has been powerful. Thank you so much for joining us. I'll make sure that we include all the links, and we'll make sure we have links for folks to follow you, to, any other places, sort of your body of work. We'll make sure that they're all tapped in with that as well.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for spending this time. I feel like there's like a million other questions we could do. Maybe bring you back next year for part 2. But just, thank you so, so much, Dr. Aimie. Fantastic. Thank you all for joining us tonight. We will be sending out the replay. We'll send out the links. Good luck for those of you who are in finals. You're going to do great.
Thank you.
Take good care, everybody.